A new Black Sea gas discovery brings Turkey closer to its goal of becoming a regional energy hub. As exploration advances, Ankara is also boosting its energy diplomacy, signing a landmark deal with Egypt. But with conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza raging, can energy ambitions overcome geopolitical tensions? I'll break it all down here on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. Turkey's energy ambitions are taking a major leap. A new natural gas discovery in the Black Sea pushes the country's total reserves to 785 billion cubic meters. Now, that's more than just energy security. It's a bid for regional influence. Ankara says it's not just cutting dependence on imports, it wants to become an energy exporter, and its diplomacy is keeping pace. A recent deal with Egypt includes the first overseas deployment of a Turkish floating storage and regasification unit, a significant strategic move in the East Med. President Erdoğan unveiled the latest 75 billion cubic meter find, enough to power Turkish homes for over 3 years. But unlocking that potential depends on Black Sea stability. With the Russia-Ukraine war still raging, Turkey is doubling down on diplomacy, pushing for a ceasefire to secure shipping lanes and protect both gas and grain exports. Can this natural gas boom, along with new energy partnerships, elevate Turkey's role as a regional power broker? For more on Turkey's long-term energy strategy, joining me now from Berlin is Thomas O'Donnell. He's an energy and geopolitical analyst. From London, Ora Sabatis, a senior energy journalist at the International Commodity Intelligence Services, and from Ankara, Oktay Tanrısever, a Middle East Technical University professor. Now, thanks for joining me. We're going to talk a little about natural gas and the energy politics of the region. Thomas, I want to start with you. So, Turkey just had another find in the Black Sea, 75 billion cubic meters. Now, is that significant when we look at the finds over the past 5 years? What does that mean for Turkey?
Well, thank you for having me again today. These finds like this are relative. If this was more gas, say in the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, it would be rather insignificant. But, Turkey burns about 50 billion cubic meters of gas a year. And, if this was exploited over 10 years or so, it's a few billion cubic meters a year. It's a significant help. And it's part of a larger program for developing fields in the Black Sea. Turkey has a problem making sure they have enough domestic energy with its growing economy. And there's all the instability of supply from Russia, which they're quite dependent on up until recently. And so it's a significant step in the right direction. I'd put it like that.
Okay. So from what I understand, these finds are kind of cumulative or like strings on a pearl where you could find more in the region. Or do you think there's more in the Black Sea that Turkey could be exploiting in the near future as well?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I would add to what Thomas just mentioned. 75 BCM is about 10% of the cumulative findings over the last 5 years. And it could help Turkey survive single-handedly just on their 75 BCM for about 2 years. So it's not negligible. It's quite encouraging, and I'm sure if properly exploited, will bring a lot of economic benefit to Turkey. In terms of additional findings, it's also an encouraging sign. Clearly, as you said, beautifully said, it's pearls on a string. And in fact, we are now seeing more and more companies looking into it, Turkey being the pioneer in terms of production, new production in the Black Sea. But in 2027, we also expect Romania to bring online Neptune Deep. And there are now also discussions where we're all very much focusing on Bulgaria as well for the development of the Karnaspruh field, also offshore Bulgaria. So really, the Black Sea is an encouraging basin, and I'm pretty convinced that we're going to see more of it, more discoveries in the years to come.
So, Oktay, over the past 10 years, I would say, I mean, there's been multiple finds in the Black Sea, also finds in southeastern Turkey as well from an oil perspective. Where do you think the energy ministry should concentrate mostly on the oil in the southeast, on the Black Sea? Is there other regions that Turkey is looking to exploit as well in the future?
Thank you. Thank you for having me in Straight Talk. I think Turkey has a very good prospect for developing both natural gas and oil resources. This is partly because of the Minister Bayraktar's strategy of using new technologies for developing under-researched areas, both in Black Sea, but also regarding the oil fields. I think Turkey doesn't need to make a choice. I think Turkey could develop both oil and natural gas. I think natural gas resources in Sakarya field was already developed. The recent discovery was a good sign. This means that Turkey could increase these reserves maybe over over 1 trillion.
Thomas, now Turkey has been called a regional energy hub, or on its way to becoming a regional energy hub. To have that title or to have that label, in your mind, what are the conditions that Turkey would need to meet to truly be the region's energy hub? And what's missing, or has it met all those conditions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, we've talked about this over the years here. To really be a hub, you have to have multiple supplies and be able to, I would say, be able to establish a price. Turkey talks about having its own blend. So if you look back before the beginning, maybe 5 years back or so, it was mainly what's coming into Turkey is pipeline gas. And the idea was to, principally, I would say, the motivations here was that Turkey really needed to have secure supplies for its own economic development. And it was quite dependent on Russian pipeline gas. And it got a lot of criticisms for this, but at the same time, I think Turkey was quite aware that there was risk involved. And it would, it also gets gas from Azerbaijan and various relationships with Iran. But what's happened, especially since 2022 and the war, Russia's attack on Ukraine, of course, there's been all sorts of problems with the reliability of Russian gas. And so Turkey, I think, as its demand has continued to increase, has done many things in an all-sided way to try and improve its energy security. Gas is a piece of that. And it looks like Turkey has switched more to looking now very immediately to LNG, and it's made a series of agreements with LNG distributors. Let me see, it's Shell, Exxon, and Total are the three that come to mind right now. I think there's also an arrangement with Bahrain. And the idea here is to supply a significant portion of its own demand, but also to be able to export it. And that's important for various things. It's important geopolitically, for relationships, and to be a player in the region. It's also important for income. At the same time, as we know, Turkey is pushing on nuclear power, hydropower, even geothermal power, and various types of renewables. And if, to my way of looking at it, if they don't make the mistake, I'm sitting here in Germany, the mistake that Germany or Spain has made of overdependence on renewables, thinking this is going to be free and it's going to be easy, they're realizing here in Europe, Germans are realizing they need a tremendous amount of natural gas to back up that generation. So Turkey hasn't made the mistake of going too far that direction. It's creating a mix. And that's how I see it. The hub is both a question for the domestic supply to guarantee it, but also in the future, as you know, Russian gas, if it does not return to Europe, we could talk about that. If it does not return to Europe, I think Turkey can play a major role in increasing supplies up through Bulgaria and into Europe. And that would be a profitable business.
Okay. So one of the conditions I understood was Turkey needs to be a market maker, I think to simplify it, but also have a diverse portfolio. Now, Turkey's also improved its relationship with Central Asian nations like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all big players in natural gas and oil. Azerbaijan, also close ally. Do you feel that the diversification by Turkey has been enough to overcome the bottlenecks from the war in Ukraine?
Diversification is certainly very important, and Turkey has done indeed a great job, not just in terms of diversifying supply, but also in terms of building infrastructure such as expanding storage. The Tuzgörlü, the Silivri storage facilities are critical. But I would go back to what Thomas said regarding the hub. You always need to define this hub, because if you understand the hub as a traded hub, for example, the sort of hub that we would have in the Netherlands, a hugely liquid hub that everyone uses in the world, the prices of the Dutch hub are currently used as benchmarks in pricing gas. Then Turkey still has a lot of catching up to do, because prices in Turkey are regulated, and on the exchange, even though Turkey has this tremendous potential, a lot of demand, diverse supplies, a big country, so it has a big potential to trade these volumes on the exchange on EPIAS, but comparatively, compared to these huge fundamental drivers, the volumes traded on EPIAS are very low. And that's because the price is regulated. Potash continues to have a big monopoly in the market. So ideally, in an ideal scenario, Turkey should open up, allow the gas sector to develop commercially rather than politically, see it politically. And at that point, Turkey could really capitalize on its huge potential, because it does have this tremendous potential. But right now, it's being reined in politically.
Mm-hmm. Oktay, it seems that the Energy Ministry has the goal of one day becoming an exporter. How far away is Turkey from becoming an oil and gas exporter?
I think Turkey could both import and export. Turkey has already been exporting energy to neighboring countries, but the volume is quite limited. I think Turkey could increase this potential in future with these new discoveries. Turkey's new discovery in the Black Sea in terms of natural gas, and also discovery in Gabar, I think they will all contribute to Turkey's capacity to export some of its energy to neighboring areas like Azerbaijan's region of Nakhchivan, Bulgaria, maybe countries in the Central Europe or Southeast Europe. So Turkey has already expressed its intention of collaborating with its energy-rich neighbors, and it will use its own infrastructure to share excess gas and oil with the neighboring countries. I think potentially this is possible, but Turkey is also a developing country economically. It needs more energy.
Thomas, over the past 10, maybe 15 years, Turkey made a lot of investments with these seismic research vessels, this discovery vessels and whatnot. And it seems to be paying off, because obviously the deal with Somalia, very, very important. Turkey's vessels over there searching off the Horn of Africa. It seems that a deal signed with Egypt where regasification units and floating storage is being sent there. How important were these infrastructure investments, if we can call them infrastructure, investments that are complementary to the discovery and drilling or extraction of gas and oil?
Well, I think it's important to realize two things. First of all, the point Aura made about having a, let's call it a liberalized market at home. If you want to be a hub and set up, have a price set, you have to let the price be set by the market forces and so forth. That's one thing. And the other thing is, for any country that has a problem with energy security, and Turkey did, and they're working very hard to get energy independence, you get the same problem, say, that the Chinese did in the mid-1990s. They realized they were going to have to go abroad for massive amounts of oil and gas. Rather than just being a buyer, they actually sent their companies out. And it was very difficult at first for them to go out. It was difficult for them to find, good fields. They also went to Somalia, and but over time they got experience, and they developed technologically, and they became players. And little by little, they were able to get better and better reserves, higher quality. And so it's a similar thing that Turkey is doing. And by doing that, by getting out there and being a player, both on the tech side, but also when it comes to trading, I'll have to say, as time goes on, then you become more sophisticated, and you know what you're doing, dealing with these big firms, for example, dealing with a country like Qatar or dealing with ExxonMobil. You can deal with them in a competent manner, and that's, anyway, I think it's a wise choice, and it should be continued.
Okay. Or a big deal with Egypt, called a landmark deal, basically. How important is this for Turkey? How important is it for Egypt?
You mean the fact that Turkey has subchartered one of its FSRUs to Egypt for on a temporary basis? Mm-hmm. Just to clarify.
Yes, we're talking about
it's important.
The floating storage and the regasification unit, the cooperation between both countries.
Yep. No, it is indeed very important. And Egypt has big demand, particularly during the summer period, because of air conditioning. Unfortunately, it also had a couple of issues with payments for production at the big Zohr field. So it was, I would say, a common sense decision to approach Turkey and to subcharter this FSRU. We don't know exactly whether it was the FSRU that is currently based in the Mediterranean, so at Redraw, or whether it was Saros. But in any case, it was very good because it takes advantage of these seasonal differences. Turkey has high demand in winter, and of course, we expect this FSRU to come back to Turkey in winter, and then during summer, Turkish demand tends to fall, and it makes sense to subcharter the vessel to Egypt, where, on the contrary, demand increases during the summer. But in any case, in the longer term, if Turkey, of course, wants to open up the borders and to import LNG and to facilitate the export of LNG to Southern Europe, then of course it might still need all these FSRUs that it has chartered, in addition to the onshore LNG terminals at Marmara and Aliara. So I suppose going forward, LNG will play a big role for Turkey, especially with a lot of LNG coming to the market from next year because of high production, the US and Qatar doubling production. This means that prices will fall. And knowing Turkey, I suspect that they will be looking to optimize their portfolios and take advantage of falling LNG prices. So going forward, this deal might not be replicated next year, but this year is certainly a good option.
Oktay, over the past 10 years, I think in Turkey's foreign policy portfolio, the East Med has probably been one of the most tense areas. And the discovery of hydrocarbons in that area, obviously the complications from the island of Cyprus with the Turkish north and the Greek south, the many disputed areas, the exclusive economic zone negotiations as well. When we look at where Turkey is right now, whether it be the East Med Forum or a potential pipeline in the future, whether it be politically or from an energy perspective, how is the situation for Turkey now versus how it was 5 or 10 years ago?
I think Turkey's position was clear from the beginning. Turkey intended to transform Eastern Mediterranean into a zone of cooperation. The EastMed project excluded Turkey, and this was not really helpful for the development of regional energy resources. But Turkey's recent moves proved that Turkey is really interested in regional cooperation.
Thomas, a lot's happened in Syria. A big dynamic shift there. How's that going to impact regional energy policies or initiatives? Can Syria play an important role in the region now with new leadership?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we're not looking to Syria, as far as I know. You could ask somebody at Exxon if they would tell you. I don't see Syria having thought to be having any significant reserves of gas. They've got some oil, so I don't see that in and of itself making a big impact. There's questions of pipelines perhaps transiting the country that's sort of quite speculative right now. If I could just add, I think an important thing here is Turkey, if I may, Turkey becoming a hub means they're looking for a customer, obviously, and the customer, aside from Egypt, the main thing is Europe. And the problem with Europe is I don't know how else to describe it, but it's rather schizophrenic. On the one hand, they have these goals to really push forward to implement green energy. And on the other, in Germany, I'm sitting here, they're the ones that were always the number one. They're going to have 100% green wind and solar. But the problem is they found out they can't install more unless they have essentially a whole natural gas system to back it up, because they get these long periods without sufficient wind and sun, and they also can't produce enough on their own territory. But on the other, so here we are, here's Turkey, but also if you talk to people in Algeria or in Azerbaijan, the EU talks about we need this gas long-term probably, and they even signed MOUs, for example, with Azerbaijan in 2022 to double the Southern Corridor pipeline, and nothing happens because they don't want to sign long-term contracts because, well, after all, we're all going to be green in 10, 15 years, whatever. But they know it's not true. They're also installing natural gas turbines like crazy here in Germany is their plan. So Turkey is kind of caught in this situation. I think they have a good business model going forward, but they have a problem on that end. And for example, right now they could double the pipeline capacity through Turkey from Azerbaijan, the Southern Corridor, and that would be a good business to Europe. If they don't want it long-term contracts, fine, let them take short-term contracts. But the other complication here is not only will Europe not make a firm commitment for long-term, but on the other side, there's Turkmenistan, which has been this promise for so long. If Turkmenistan could only bring its gas across the Caspian, this would be a huge contribution to send on through Turkey into Europe. Azerbaijan and Turkey have worked together on this. When you talk to them, they would be willing to build part of the pipeline themselves, but not without these long-term contracts. And so there's this kind of limbo that they're stuck in to go forward. And maybe simply events, energy crisis like we saw in Spain, where it lost, a generation for so long without having a reliable backup like natural gas. Maybe that'll resolve the question. But this is a little bit of uncertainty that Turkey faces in how they develop.
Thomas, I wasn't planning on touching on the EU, but I think it's interesting that you did. Ora, how do you see the Turkey-EU relationship from an energy perspective moving forward?
It's a bit of a complicated relationship, as you'd expect, especially in the context of the EU publishing recently the roadmap to phase out Russian gas. And Turkey right now is the only remaining corridor for the transport of pipeline Russian gas to Europe. So that means that if the EU is really serious about it, this corridor will stop 2027. The other issue is, of course, the connection between Turkey and Bulgaria on the former Trans-Balkan pipeline, or Western Line, as it's also called, because that route has now been used to bring in gas from Turkey, and we don't know the origin of this gas. So I suspect that in the future there will be a lot of discussion between the EU and Turkey regarding the origin of this gas.
Thomas, Ora, Oktay, thanks for joining me. That was wonderful insight. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.